welcome. I am very happy that we have a friendly crowd tonight.
Microphone.
But we have a little business to take care of first. This is our annual meeting of the Cape Elizabeth Historical Preservation Society. So we have to attend to some business matters first, like the election of officers. And this year we made some changes to the bylaws. And I guess I'm supposed to be hooked up. Can anybody hear me? So we are going to be voting on bylaws, changes to the bylaws, and then on officers, and then we'll move right on to the program for tonight. I'm going to go over the changes in the bylaws first, because the main change in the bylaws is going to be on the term of office, which we're changing for the officers, which is the president, vice president, and treasurer and secretary, that those were in the past 2-year terms. So we're changing those to 1-year terms for everybody. And then in previous bylaws, who knows why, we forgot to say what the term of office was for the rest of the directors. So everybody is going to be 1-year terms now. And that's what's involved with the changes. Do I have a motion to accept them?
I move we accept the changes as written.
Okay, I have a second?
Second.
Second, okay, all those in favor? Opposed? It's passed. So, the slate of officers' nominations were pretty much similar to last year. President Bob Dodd, Vice President Melissa Gacci, Secretary Ellen Van Fleet, Treasurer Tom Myers, Members at Large Jack Boyce, Diane Brakely, Dick Kempton, and a new member, Joel Bassett. So we have a second for a motion to accept the slate.
I make a motion
that we,
Heard the second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Oh, come on. All right. So we can go right on to the program now, which is on the stories from the Cape Elizabeth Historical Preservation Society. Go first into the idea and the early days. And for the idea, I thought it was really best to read from a letter that Connie Murray had written about how she came up with the idea, and who some of the people were that were involved in the very early days of the Historical Society. Now, even though this was her recollection of this, how she came up with the idea and formed the organization and the early days of the organization, she wrote it in the third person, which sounds a little weird, but that's okay, because it was Dr. Murray that did it. So she writes, the organization of the Cape Elizabeth Historical Preservation Society. When Dr. Constance Murray retired from the Lexington Public Schools in Massachusetts, she looked for a community organization to which she could make a contribution. A neighbor, Roger Ray, had completed an exhibit on manuscripts and artifacts in the Maine Historical Society relating to Cape Elizabeth. It seemed rather sparse. So Dr. Murray called Robert Parker, president of the Cape Elizabeth South Portland Historical Society. So it was one society back then. And Pauline Perrow, retired from the Library of Congress, and Josephine Cobb, first woman hired by the U.S. Archives, both also members, to ask about the society. The three agreed that it would be preferable to create a new society focusing on Cape Elizabeth. In the meantime, Dr. Murray had gone to the town hall and asked to see how and where Cape Elizabeth kept its papers. She found loose papers on open shelves in no order of date or significance. I can tell you, interjecting, that I can understand why she was horrified, that would make her horrified, yes. Some were crammed into cartons in the town hall basement next to the boiler. The oldest records were jammed in a small safe of the cafeteria. None were cataloged nor properly stored. Now, if you've seen these old records up in the archives room where we are now in our current home, some of these are just beautifully bound records. And the manuscript, the writing in them is just worth preserving. It's, even though they're tax records or property records, they're just beautiful. The manuscript is beautiful. The binding is beautiful. These definitely were things worth preserving. So she assembled a small group: David Stack, Bryce Murray, Miriam Chapman, to list the books in the town safe. Another group met with Lois Merrill to catalog the materials held by Bryce Murray, and also those of Florence Petrolick, both of Cape Elizabeth. Some of these same people also began to discuss the formal organization of a society. Letters were sent to citizens of Cape Elizabeth. This was in January of 1978. Letters were sent to citizens, and about 25 came. Eventually, bylaws were written and adopted and officers elected. Donald Philbrook donated the services of his office to obtain the papers necessary to organize the Cape Elizabeth Historical Preservation Society as a nonprofit corporation in Maine. Charter members included Constance Murray, Helen and Roger Ray, Lydia Summers, Miriam Chapman, David Stack, Bryce and Eleanor Murray, Clinton Murray, Lois Merrill, Irma Bostwick, Robert Parker, Josephine Cobb, Pauline Perro, Florence Petrolick, Rena McGowan, and Lou and Ruth Winnick. So those were the charter members of the Cape Elizabeth Historical Society. So the first days of the Historical Society, they were housed in the town hall. They were, Mike McGovern was not he was the assistant town manager. John Henchy was the town manager at the time. They used an empty room over the town manager's office on the second floor. It had not been used for some time, so they gathered up some large tables, painted some rusty, dirty chairs, made some attractive, one of the members made some attractive curtains out of bed sheets, and that was the first year of the Cape Elizabeth Historical Preservation Society. And Robert Parker, who worked for Jordan Marsh, offered a rug discarded by that firm to cover up the unattractive floor. So, okay. They, in November of 1986, formally opened the Cape Elizabeth Historic Center. We refer to our History Center now as the History Center, but back when she opened this to the public, it was then located in the basement of the newly renovated library, which has been since then renovated again. So this was back when the original library was here, and they had a opening in November of 1986. It was written up in the Portland Evening Express, and if you can see from that photograph that a lot of the shelving that we still use today was used by Connie. On the left side are some of the old town records. On the right side are a lot of empty shelves, which you don't see anymore because those have been filled to the gill, and we're soon are going to be needing more space to store items. At that point, the main focus of the society was preservation. The records that they rescued from town hall primarily were items that they were seeking to preserve them in environmentally controlled conditions and make them available to historians. And what Connie says in this article is that she foresaw the Historic Center being used mostly by town officials and genealogists, hoping that eventually students would take advantage of the center as a source for research material. She envisioned a center manned by preservationists who have years of catalog work to do. Well, she's certainly right about that there are still years of catalog work to do. And it's a lot of the work that the Historical Society is still undertaking today. So those are the early days. And the next set of stories, Jack Boyce is going to talk about some of the stories surrounding the acquisitions, which is still a major part of the work that we do.
Good evening. Acquisitions are a very important part for the continuation of a successful historical society. Visitors want to see and hear about new pieces, and here are a few of ours with a little background. Okay, the Portland print. This was done in 1859 by J.W. Hill. And you ask, why have a picture of South Portland looking over the Ford River to Portland? Well, in 1859, up until 1895, Front Street, which this is today what would be Front Street, was Cape Elizabeth. This area depicts where Centerboard Yacht Club is and Aspasia Marina are today. Saltwater Grill and Bug Light Park are just off to the right of what you see. And going on, I've got to remember to change there. Going on are two early photos from the archives of the Venerable Cunner Association and Propeller Club. Probably some of you have never heard of it, but some probably know about it. That was started in Cape Elizabeth in 1845, and as of today, it is the oldest continually operated social club in the United States. And as per the original bylaws, which we have from the collection, the membership still stands at 25 people, no more, no less, with a waiting list. And they meet once a year in August to keep status. In other words, if you take and have one meeting a year, I guess you can call it continuous. The Historical Society acquired the entire archive of the Cunner Club, including artifacts, many early photographs, and membership records. The club and the Historical Society worked together to have the club's archives released from the Maine Maritime Museum in Bath, where it was on loan. The club wanted it back to where it began, Cape Elizabeth, a great part of Cape history back to where it belongs. And we now have the whole collection, and in the future months, we're going to take one of the rooms upstairs and sort of divide it out, and that's going to be the Cunner Club. That's where we're going to display it. Next, we have the Ralph Gould collection of antique musical instruments, previously displayed at Colby College. But since Colby was going through a building and renovation of the music department, they had no room or need for the collection and got in touch with the Gould family, which family members are still in the area, for final distribution. The Gould family and Dick Kempton and Jim Rowe of our society worked out that the collection should be back in the Cape. The collection represents woodwinds, clarinets, piccolos, and fifes, and brasses, including cornets, trumpets, and bugles, and a very unusual leather over wood serpent, circa 1810. And this is a bass instrument for bands and orchestras prior to the tuba. The tuba hadn't been invented yet, so this was the bass instrument. Many of these instruments with a little TLC could be brought back to playable condition. If anybody in the audience would like to donate specifically for the restoration of some of these instruments, it would be greatly appreciated. The collection is on display in a lighted case in the Cape History Center. Ralph Gould, for those of you who do not know of him, was a longtime resident of the Cape and a very active in civic affairs, in founding local bands, including the Cape Elizabeth Fire Department Band, managed the Portland Symphony Orchestra, and created the Ralph T. Gould Award for Citizenship in 1986. This collection is the highlight to see in the Cape History Center, even if you don't like music. You never know what is going to walk through the door. A couple from Chebeague Island stopped in with a bag of 29, oops. A couple from Chebeague Island stopped in with a bag of 29 pieces of silver-plated flatware, with all the handles engraved Oki L. Alexander, which was a collier hauling coal from Philadelphia to Portland, which wrecked off Trundy's Point in 1947, excuse me, with no loss of life. And what's amazing is between the Cape Elizabeth Fire Department volunteers and the United States Coast Guard, all 13 crew members were saved by the bosun's buoy. They got a bosun's buoy out and brought the people, the crew off. The question is, how did the flatware survive the wreck, or did it leave the ship as a souvenir with the previous captain or crew member? We will never know. Not shown in the photo are also iced tea and bouillon spoons and cocktail forks. Very strange for a rough and tough crew hauling coal from Philadelphia to Portland to have such formal flatware. Very strange indeed. Paintings and prints are true reference in time, as was the previous Portland print of the Cape Shore about 1859. Here on the left, we have an oil on artist board entitled Delno Woods by John Calvin Stevens. He was an artist, but he was also the architect and the founding fathers, I should say, of the shingle style home and cottage, as they used to say. Cottages are huge homes, but they call them cottages. And there are many of these still existing in Delno Park and along the Cape Shore. He was a member of the Brushens, an accomplished art group including George Frederick Morse, Frank Louvel Bowie, John Wood, and Charles Kimball. The group painted a great deal from Delno Park and up the coast and the islands of Casco Bay and around Portland, up until the early 1930s. The painting on the right is of Turkey Hill Farm out on off Old Ocean House Road by Francis Orville Libby, an important local artist. And he was also a member of the Salmagundi Club in Boston, so he had a good reputation. He was a member of the Prussians at the very end of their reign and was very instrumental in starting the Hayloft Society art group in the mid to late 30s. This painting was donated to us by the estate of Peter Eastman, the last owner of Turkey Hill Farm, which at his death transferred to the Cape Elizabeth Land Trust. Okay. The barn at Turkey Hill Farm was used as an art gallery and also a tea room for a short period of time. And it was the gallery for shows and a meeting place for the group, the Hayloft Society. Emma Eastman, Peter's mother, was an accomplished artist going to art school in St. Louis, along with Rupert Lovejoy, Inez Rand, Dr. John Allen, Lolita Evelett, and J. Tubby, to name a few. We have a number of the Haylofters examples exhibited in the museum. And lastly, we have an original last will and testament of Cape Elizabeth's founding father, the Reverend Robert Jordan. The Reverend Robert Jordan's last will and testament dated 1670 and executed at his death in 1679. This is a document of 2 sheets, double-sided. A side note, this and other early local documents were a few steps away, literally, from being trashed. While a sharp-eyed, non-relative saw potential of the historic value in the old paper stuff being thrown out while cleaning out a house of another relative and salvaged it for us. The collection is a treasure trove of 18th and early 19th century local history. The Peebles Farm, the Staples Farm, all sorts of early names of Cape Elizabeth, documents, deeds, letters, etc. It's really great. We have had the will professionally restored and stabilized, and it will be on display at the Cape History Center at the museum. These examples are just a few of the highlights. Check your attics and hidey holes, and you also may have some of that good old paper stuff. Thank you.
All right, so now we're on to the story of the bones. Jane.
Okay, I want to preface this by saying I was not a member of the Historical Society in Cape Elizabeth. At the very beginning, I was a member of the South Portland, which was called, they called it Cape Elizabeth South Portland, all in one breath. So, it took me a while, and when I was working in the library as a reference librarian, I often had errands to come downstairs where the Historical Society was having their informal work sessions, and very often they would be so excited about something that was happening that they got my attention. And I came over here and joined this group. I need a little more space. Okay, Bones Part 1. If you can remember as a child digging in the sand at a beach, or perhaps a garden at home, then you can imagine how the Peterson children were excited when they began to realize what they were uncovering right near where they lived, at Hannaford Cove. Their sister Ann Peterson later wrote the story in a report for a course she was taking at New York University. The site was first discovered, she wrote, on August 15, 1954, by Thomas Peterson, age 9, his brother Louis, 13, and their cousin John, 12. Where a banking was washed out at the edge of the beach, the boys saw 2 odd-looking shells. Most of us would probably have continued to dig indiscriminately, but their parents, Elizabeth and Roger Peterson, were very much interested in things history-related, archaeology, and they knew, and their children picked up from dinner table conversations probably, not to keep digging and to call for backup. Okay, so they knew not to disturb the site. When adults came, they called on some acquaintances who were in the process of working with other archaeology jobs, if you will call it that. They came and looked at the shell heap and its bones, and they later had Christopher Packard, who was an archaeologist, come and examine them. And eventually he determined that they were worth trying to preserve. He had help from the Portland Museum of Natural History. I don't know whether any of you remember, it was a wonderful little museum near Portland Public Library, where it is now. I think it's Elm Street, I'm not sure. Anyway, there Christopher Packard took charge of the bones and the shell heap, and there they found many animal and human bones in addition to the shell heap, which has historical qualification as a Native American site. In her report, she wrote, the arrangement of some of the bones indicates a ritual burial. We might infer from this that the person who was once living was respected, probably loved. The museum, unfortunately, no longer exists, and since they had the bones that Petersons gave to them, we have no idea about their final disposition. Another mystery. We're jumping to 1986. It was the summer when Inn by the Sea, new building, was almost finished, and they decided they wanted a swimming pool. Maybe it was in the plans ahead, but they were getting to it later in the process. And digging a swimming pool with excavation equipment, surprise, they were digging up bones. An inconvenience for the excavations crew, but following protocol and state laws, they had to stop the dig for a while. They were collected and sent to Augusta for study. While they were gone, big mystery, lots of excitement among the historians in our town, but nothing happened. No word. Silence from Augusta. 12 years went by.
Oh my.
12 years. Connie said, I wonder what happened to the bones. Now, with her experience teaching, she had acquired some skills in moving things along. As you can imagine, she spoke to the right people and found where they were. They had been moved while they were gone, and of course there was a lot of talk in the Historical Society. Most other people didn't know anything about this, or care. But local people quickly realized there was a burial ground just north of, in by the sea, up the coast a little bit. Some people know of it as the Bowery Beach burial ground. They didn't call it a cemetery. Some Cape families are interred there, and among them, Dyers, Davidson, Jim Hunt, along with a number of Spanish sailors who were washed ashore from the wreck of the schooner Charles in July 1807. Now, these sailors were mostly unidentified as individuals, but their graves are there today, and you can find them if you know where to look. And they at least had headstones, not inscribed, but taken from the shore, just whatever stones people could find that looked appropriate. And Chief Pickering deserves some credit for getting those bones back here. I kind of skipped along because my papers are out of order. There was a Marcella Sorg, a forensic anthropologist at the University of Maine. And she's the one who studied those bones and determined that there were at least 6 individuals. We don't still have the picture. If you want the picture of the bones as they were discovered, if you have one of our copies of Past Present, then that photograph is in there. The medical examiner's report came back due to Connie's pressures about school teachers' manners. They included at least 6 individuals. The condition of bones suggests that they date to late 18th century to perhaps into the early 19th century. Do you want to ask me any questions? Because I'm going to skip off for time's purposes.
You can hold the questions to the end.
At the end, okay, hold your questions, the boss says. Let me see, I wanted to add, my family and I went and looked for this burial site. I had been by it many times, but I wanted to make sure I knew something about what I was supposed to be talking about tonight. And so we found both the burial ground as it looks today, and there is a probably Murray Company work of a monument. Quote, "Here lie the remains of 6 unknown persons, died circa 1810, reinterred by Cape Elizabeth Historical Preservation Society, August 1998. And I have to give, this is the process of our group. That's Bob Lee, who read a few appropriate words to make sure that they were properly buried. That's the way they came back, and I think that's Chief Pickering, who helped bring them back
That's
from,
Yeah,
Yeah,
Pickering
we
there.
did.
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
With Connie, Dr.
In
Murray.
response to Connie's question, yeah. So he helped get them back here without mailing them. Okay, I think that's it.
Good job.
Thank you. Next,
Oh, next up. tours and a self-driving tour. Dorothy Higgins.
Okay. In 2010, the Cape Elizabeth Historical Preservation Society held a bus tour with 2 buses. Each bus had 2 guides. South Cape bus was Norm Jordan and Wayne Brooking. The North Cape bus was Joe Higgins and Jack Boyce. Some people on the buses were past Cape residents that told of some old memories. Lots of laughs was to be held by all, as well as a learning history of the Cape. In 2015, as part of the 250th Cape Elizabeth anniversary celebration, the Historical Society had a self-driving tour. The society placed members at 10 sites around Cape Elizabeth. As you can see, there's the things. And the map was provided to help participants find locations. Our members and sites were: number 1, the Spurwing Church with Jane Jordan. Number 2 was the Town Center with Jerry Murray. Sprague Hall and the Pomeroy Jordan House was Norm Jordan. The Dyer Hutchinson House was Jay Cox. Fort Williams, the Goddard Mansion, was Jim Rowe and Jane Beckwith. Richmond Island and Kettle Cove was Lois Merrill. Two Lights was Wayne Brooking. And Journey's End Farm was Louise Sullivan. Shore Road Trolley Stop was Jack Boyce and Ellen Van Fleet. Cape Cottage Post Office was Joe and Dorothy Higgins. It was a very successful endeavor, and maybe someday we tried to recreate it, but sadly we would be missing some of our best local historians. As you see, you can go around and see the programs that were set up at each stop. We would love to try to do things like this again, as Bob said, so if you can think of things that we could do, just please let us know and we'll be gladly to do it. I know all my historian friends would do it. Plus, some of you people, if you're not members, you could help us too. Thank you.
We'll move now to stories from the pandemic. This is stories that were inspired as we sat in our homes not being able to do anything except to think of ideas. So during the pandemic. Melissa.
Hello, my name is Melissa Gatchie, and the following comments that I am presenting to you are made on behalf of Ellen Van Fleet, who could not be with us this evening. The following is Ellen's story in her own words. The COVID-19 pandemic brought the Historical Society to a near halt. Daily walks outside became a critical part of one's day. On one of those walks, I saw a neighbor with her young son near the old trolley stop at 618 Shore Road, across from Island View Road. They stopped me to ask what the little roof in the middle of the stone wall was for. The boy was fascinated to learn that there had been trolleys in Cape Elizabeth. You can see that stop depicted right here in the lower corner. Little roof, and you've got the windmill in the back. We also talked about why Shore Road was so wide at that location. Up here, the top center picture, you can see the 2 sets of tracks. Also called the Mountain View Turnout, it was essentially a passing location for the trolleys. Notice the light post with the brackets that held the electric wires that powered the trolleys. On the way home, it occurred to me that it would be fun to share the story of the trolleys that once ran regularly up and down Shore Road. Summer was coming, and I envisioned a booklet that would be the basis of a safe outdoor family activity. It would lead you on a 1.5-mile outing, walking or driving, following the trolley route, and learning some of its history. There would be a map with each stop numbered. Inside, each number would include a description, an old photo if we could find one, and some thought-provoking questions. Maybe I'd add a coloring page with a picture of a trolley. I'd even include a pen to mark off each stop as you completed it. I enlisted my friend Diane Brakely on this project, which we could work on from our separate homes thanks to telephones and the internet. We started with the Historical Society's fantastic photo collection, and that led us to contact the Trolley Museum in Kennebunkport for permission to use some of their photos. From them, we learned about the one remaining streetlight from that period. This is shown right here in this upper right photograph. It's at the corner of Mitchell and Shore Roads and has a support that once carried the electric cable to power the trolleys. The light post became the start of the walking tour. In the finished booklet, there are 9 stops ending at Maiden Cove Children's Center on Cottage Lane, which was the casino, a seaside restaurant with an incredible view. That was the whole point of the trolley, to bring people from the city out to the country for fresh air, a show at the Cape Cottage Theater, and dinner and dancing at the casino. A casino where there was no gambling, by the way. We sold the trolley booklet at the IGA in Drillin's hardware store, and it was a good fundraiser. This booklet is still for sale at the Cape History Center, and we do have some here tonight if you are interested. It's great if you have kids and are looking for a fun outing, or even if you're just a trolley or history buff. There's one additional photo here in the bottom center, and that is of the trolley sitting in front of the Armstrong store. The turnaround was just beyond that. Thank you.
The next story of the pandemic era were the 2 dioramas that are now on display at the museum. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That, again, keep from going crazy. The Fort Williams diorama, both of these were dioramas that I and my son made. The Fort Williams diorama had actually started before the pandemic, just before. I had been working at the Historic Society, saw dozens and dozens of photos of the old fort, that they are all pretty much, individual buildings. I just had no concept, having not grown up in Cape Elizabeth, of how everything kind of came together into one military base. And so I talked to Jim Rowe, who was is our Fort Williams guru, and asked what he thought about having a model made of the fort. And he was very encouraging to go ahead with that. And then the pandemic hit. There wasn't much that we could do. We were all going crazy, stir crazy. And so it actually was a good time to just set up in the garage and start working on the model. My original idea was to make these buildings out of balsa wood. And my son, who has a 3D printer, says, "Now you know I'll make these out of, I can print them for you." And so I would send over the photos, what the scale was, and he would print them out and I would paint them. And that made all the difference in the world, it really did. But the main thing with the fort diorama was to get the scale right. It had to be a scale that would fit into a space that we could work with. And there was another kind of requirement that there was a track at Fort Williams where they transported the mines that they put out into the harbor. And so the model the diorama had to be on a scale that the track was available at. So if you're familiar with railroad modeling, there are many. There's HO, there's N scale, Z scale, T scale. Pretty pretty much every scale that you can imagine, down to T and double T scale, which is tiny, tiny, tiny. And but they still made track and trains that will run on that. But I just needed the track, and so since that was that kind of established at that scale, 1/420th, that the entire model of the Fort Williams area would fit into a 6 by 6 foot platform. So that was perfect. So that worked out just right. And other than figuring out how to get it out of my garage and to the Historic Society, which was another story for another time. But it went to the library for a while because we really had no home at that point to put it at the Fort Williams building. We had not moved in there yet. And so it was, for about a year, it was at the library. The other diorama, since the pandemic was still going on and I was still going stir crazy, started a second diorama and asked around what people thought would be a nice thing to have a diorama of. And it was decided to go with downtown Cape Elizabeth in 1925, 1930, so about 100 years ago. And so in order to get an idea of what was people referred to as Pond Cove at the time, I talked to a lot of people, read a lot of what we had on file as far as memories that people had written about of that time. Remembered the stories of Norm Jordan, even though he wasn't around to give more stories. But Jerry Murray was Jerry and Sally were a huge help in putting together what was there at that time. And it struck me that the interesting thing that was coming out of all this were the stories. So I wasn't so much concerned about the scale at this point. In fact, the diorama consists of 3 or 4 different scales. One scale to try to fit everything into the 6 by 5 foot space that we had available for that. One scale for the people, because I wanted to have people in this one. It was a smaller area that was being covered, so we could have bigger buildings and we could actually show people. But people were primarily available at 1/300th scale. And so it's a mixture of 1/220th to get everything to fit in, 1/300th to get the people available, and then there was another scale because there was a trolley that ran in downtown Cape Elizabeth, which I had no idea of. So all of a sudden, I had to come up with a trolley that would run along Ocean House Road, which is now Hillway coming up, make the curve. This was before Route 77 went through the middle of Cape Elizabeth, and then curved around in front of Town Hall and went down in front of 3 farms. The farms were all Hannaford farms. Jerry Murray had great stories coming out of those farms. For example, one was some Hannaford kids and some Murray kids built a boat that they were going to then take down to Zeb's Cove. Zeb's Cove at that time you could actually see from Town Hall because you didn't have the trees behind Town Hall. And so they built a boat, and then they got a ox and they attached the boat to a cart and then the ox and took the boat down to Zeb's Cove. And there was there was a thing that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, was Mount Misery that existed in Pond Cove at the time. So that had to make sure that the story that Jerry Murray told about a kid that got in trouble and spent the night on the top of Mount Misery hiding from his parents. And there was a millstone at the top of Mount Misery apparently, and he just hid out there all night long. Finally was discovered the next day. But yeah, the diorama for the town center was much different in what the intention was, and the intention really was not only to show what it looked like 100 years ago, but also tell a bunch of stories. And so I created then a scavenger hunt, which parts of which are in the museum above the diorama, but the scavenger hunt relates the stories that are contained within the diorama, and things like the boat being pulled by oxen. You can find that there. There's a group of trolley conductors coming out of the Hannaford Dining Saloon, if you remember the Hannaford Dining Saloon that was next to the W.W. Hannaford Farm, which is right across from Town Hall. So there's a group of trolley engineers coming out of the Hannaford Dining Saloon. So the scavenger hunt had you track them down to find where they are. There's a little sign there too that says Hannaford Dining Saloon. So you can see that there are a bunch of stories, 2 pages worth of stories that came out of that period. And it was an interesting period, as to me it was fascinating discovering what Cape Elizabeth was like 100 years ago, because it was soon after we split from South Portland, and so the town center was in this area that was never intended to be a town center. It really was a crossroads of a couple of Shore Road and Ocean House Road that really had no function as a town center until after the split, and then the town quickly had to build a town hall there, and eventually had a couple of schools there and the library. But yeah, it was primarily a farming area, farming outpost, and it was where the Hannaford brothers had their farm prior to opening up a wholesale business, which then led to the Hannaford supermarkets. So it was fun for me to discover what the town looked like 100 years ago, and there certainly are several remnants of it still left, but preserving the stories that people were telling, particularly Norm Jordan and
Wayne.
yeah,
Okay.
where Jerry Murray and Sally Murray had some great stories too, were to me the rewarding part of that project. So that's stories from the pandemic. So we kept busy during the pandemic, even though there was nothing that we could really do as a society together.
That was amazing what you did. It's just beyond belief.
Thank you.
And I hope you've gotten good credit for it, and it should keep coming.
I'd like to do some more. So if we have some ideas, ideas that we've kicked around was the trading post in Richmond Island, possibly the what was the other thing that we're the life-saving station at Two Lights. It'd be kind of a fun thing to do. I'd like to do one that involves a smaller area where you could have bigger buildings involved. with a 3D printer, you know, it's pure magic what you can do with that. It's pretty, you want to take advantage of that. So we can kind of wrap up here, if I want to leave some time for questions.
Yeah.
This is just kind of a summary of what has gone on since 1979 and the organization that Connie Murray started back then, which has grown and changed so much over the years, particularly in the early 2000s when computers came along, and now we're digitizing all the records and taking digital photographs of all the artifacts, 3D artifacts. But a lot of these now are on display at the museums. We've cataloged and preserved over 840 objects, cataloged and preserved. Now this is digital cataloging. Preserved over 2,800 old photos, cataloged and preserved over 5,900 documents, acquired artifacts filling 1,000 square feet of storage area, and created over 1,000 square feet of public museum space. So it's, it all started with Connie Murray's idea, and it has grown since then, and we welcome any more involvement to what is going on here. So I want to show the new logo that we just unveiled, thanks to Diane. This, just quickly, I want to go how we're organized now. So now, in addition to the work that the board of directors does overseeing the organization, we've now formed into 4 committees doing the work of the organization. The first one is the one really at the start of the whole organization was the archives, the acquisition, the storage, research, and now the digitization of the archives, which are now available through your own computers. You can get into the digital archives, into the catalogs and the photographs. The museum management, we now have the 2 museums, the Fort Williams Museum and the Town History Museum. We have community programs, which we have a committee that we're really struggling to come up with ideas for the monthly programs, and then we have an active committee that pretty much already has the program schedule worked out. We take the summer off, but starting September, October, November, December, January into February are pretty much already scheduled. So we just have to work on some details, but having the people involved, just focusing on programs has been a great help. And then facility operations, there's being in an old building, even though the town owns the building, we really depend on people like Joe and Tom and a couple other folks to watch the boilers to make sure they don't go out, which they have gone out. The heat's gone out a couple of times. If something like that can really do a lot of damage to the documents that are being stored in the building. And so, and as far as building things that we need, the museums have needed special things built for them. We've been able to go to the facilities operation people, that about five or so people that we've been able to really rely on to do that work. So that's where we are, and all of these are open. We're always looking for people to get involved, and so we would love to have you, anyone who would, at any amount of time that you'd want to commit, it's really up to you. Everything is welcome, and we just have fun, So it would just be a fun thing for you to do if you're looking for something to get involved with. But we have great ideas and plans for the future, and I think it'd be fun to have as many people involved in that as possible. So, we have a few minutes, don't we? We have 35 seconds. Does anybody have any questions or comments or stories of their own that they'd like to share? No? Well,
One question, does anyone know how to put the house lights on?
Yeah, we can
I
get that.
believe this, they're over on, yeah, that side.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming tonight, and